First Things, episode number 10.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Try to be perfect. We try to have everything in place at one point in time, and you can't.
Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to First Things, the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn. It's my goal to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. So great to have you listening today. Today, our topic is about escaping from the performance trap or the fear of failure. Now, this is a big topic. Today is going to be more of an intro to the topic. We will come back to this issue many times and dig deeper into specific topics. Now, some people hold the mindset that failure isn't an option, while others lean towards the idea that the only way to fail is by not trying. Now, I strongly hold to the latter mindset, and we will discuss this more in this episode. So now to our topic for today, the performance trap, the fear of failure. We can sometimes get off track by believing that success will bring fulfillment and happiness. William Shakespeare summed it up pretty well about 400 years ago when he said, "Our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt." In almost any activity or relationship, we are susceptible to the fear of failure. When we fail, we usually experience anger, resentment, worry, anxiety, fear, depression, and a lot of other negative emotions like those. In turn, these emotions express themselves through actions like withdrawal, hostility, being rude, and blaming others. So how do you typically respond to failure? You usually act according to your beliefs. If you believe that you are a failure, you will probably either withdraw from activities that involve a risk of failure or drive yourself to succeed to prove you are not a failure. Again, your performance often reflects your belief system. If your belief system is based on false ideas, then your thoughts, emotions, and actions are going to usually reflect those false beliefs. We think if we could meet certain standards, we would feel good about ourselves. I don't know about you, but my track record sucks in this department. How about you? I will fail and feel miserable. And even if I succeed, the occasional failure will be devastating. Probably all of us have experienced this feeling that we must meet certain arbitrary standards to attain self-worth. When we fail, this threatens our security. And as a result, we can quickly begin to let the fear of failure control us. And what is the origin of this fear? Well, can you believe it is a simple belief, a prime example of a subtle stinking thinking that sounds so right, but is deadly. And that belief is simply this: I must meet certain standards in order to feel good about myself. Let me say that again. This faulty belief that gets us into this performance trap or this fear of failure is that I must meet certain standards in order to feel good about myself. Now, as always, let's talk about some research in this. In a recent Gallup poll about top fears, teenagers listed not succeeding in life or being a failure as number 4 on their list. And this was after terrorists, spiders, and death. Specific responses included fear of making mistakes that will mess up my life, not measuring up, not achieving the goals I've set for myself, and not leaving a mark. Researchers looking into how college students react to setbacks discovered that effective coping strategies included acceptance, humor, and positive reframing. But ineffective strategies, which leave people feeling unsatisfied, included denial, self-blame, venting, disengaging, and surprisingly, social support. Now, the fear of failure was first uncovered, back in the 1960s by psychologists such as John Atkinson from Stanford University. He conducted a series of experiments on children, giving them reward-based tasks in order to test their motivation. He noticed that they divided up into two camps: those that focused on winning the reward, who approached the task with what he called a need for achievement, and those focused on their seemingly inevitable failure. And this is what he termed as a fear of failure, based on their desire to avoid the public humiliation of failure. In one experiment, the children played a game of hoop the peg. I'm sure you've seen that, where a little peg is up and you have these hoops that you try to throw on top of the peg. And he gave them greater rewards for greater distances. Now, the need for achievement kids stood a challenging but realistic distance from the peg, and they added a much more intense concentration if they failed. But those who had this fear of failure, these kids either stood right on top of the peg, or they stood so far back that failure was almost certain. Now, of course, those choosing the impossible distance were effectively disguising their fear of failure, because everyone failed at that distance. Yet that was the better response to them. Now, many of those fear of failure kids also became disruptive. They became vocal and loud, and they didn't really care for the game, and they even tried to halt the entire process for other kids as well. Norman Feather, an Australian psychologist, undertook some similar experiments, came up with similar conclusions, although he also found that he could manipulate the response by telling the children the task was very difficult. And this seemed to encourage the high fear of failure kids to continue, I guess because the humiliation of failure had been lowered for them. In the 1970s, Carol Dweck and Ellen Leggett did some experiments with children as well, where they found that either this kind of mastery-oriented focus, meaning that they were focused on acquiring new skills and therefore they were kind of unconcerned about temporary setbacks, was contrasted against kids that were very ego-oriented, which meant that their main concern was not to look bad or to be humiliated in some fashion. Now, let me be clear. There is nothing wrong with doing a good job or pushing towards your highest potential, but that's not the issue here. That hasn't been my issue. What I had been doing for so much of my life was tying my performance to my worth. A quick test to see if you have this issue present in your life is to simply ask how you handle failure. We've talked a lot about failure in previous podcasts. I think it is this huge area that people should work on, because we have a society and education system that sees success as a destination and not a journey. So if you beat up on yourself when you fail, or if you consider failure as not an option, you might be dealing with this performance trap, this perfectionism. Another quick test, if you have fallen into a performance trap, is to inventory your life in regard to limitations. Do you have any limitations? Do you find yourself checking email 7 days a week? Do you always have your phone on you? Do you have a tendency to look at your phone more than paying attention to friends or family? Do you find that you rarely relax and enjoy life? Are you so busy making a living that you are forgetting to make a life? Now, here's something interesting to consider. Could it be that we become so obsessed with efficiency or to-do list or goals or even productivity because deep down we fear failure in those areas? So we can become enslaved to a to-do list because it's just another expression of perfectionism, just cosmetically altered, if you will, to make it look like a good thing. Think about that some. A fear of failure can create perfectionism, but it can also create what I call learned helplessness. This is an area I've done a lot of research and publications in. This approach is one which basically gives up due to failure. The person sums up past failures as their identity. They fail because they assume they are a failure in these areas. They are helpless, but this was something they learned by experiencing failures, thus the term learned helplessness. Many people face this, for example, in learning math or statistics. I can't begin to tell you how many students have approached me the first day of class to tell me that they would struggle the entire class and not ever get math because they were no good at it. People who deal with this are quick to interpret present failures as an accurate reflection of their worthlessness. So the easiest thing to do is to simply feel helpless, assume failure is just part of their life and who they are, and simply stop trying. Now, others can express the fear of failure by having a boot camp life full of self-imposed rules. These will often have very rigid schedules, will get very agitated when someone messes up their scheduled events, or they will have very detailed rules for every situation, even down to which sock they put on their feet first in the morning. The more rules, the more adherence to them, the less chance they feel they will ever fail. Rules become a safety net as they balance on the high wire of life. Let me ask you some questions. Think through these and ask yourself how much these apply to you. They may not all apply, but if you find more than one does, you could be dealing with a fear of failure or performance trap in your life. Do you ever avoid participation in certain activities because you don't want to look foolish or mess up? Does the thought of messing up in some important area cause you to worry or become anxious? Do you find yourself worrying about things? Do you sometimes have unexplained anxiety? Can you see areas in your life you feel someone would claim you are a perfectionist about? Now, here's a big one. Do you feel the need to justify any mistakes you make? Are there areas of your life you are more prone to condemn yourself unless you succeed? Is failure something that sets you back emotionally? Do you get irritated and mad at people who interrupt you or make you look incompetent? And last, does it seem you are overly self-critical of yourself? Well, what are some of the effects of the fear of failure? Well, one of those is perfectionism. Now, we've discussed this already, but perfectionism is simply an unwillingness to fail. The biggest problem with this? It totally kills creativity. I like to think of creativity and failure as possibly being next-door neighbors. If you insist on never living near the neighbor called failure, you essentially move away from your neighbor called creativity. Also, this mentality creates a focus on the negative. So you can get 100 compliments to your business report, but one negative comment, and you will end up thinking about that negative comment the entire day. That is similar to saying that someone gave you $100 and then borrowed $1 from you, and all you can think about is the fact that someone borrowed $1 from you. How crazy, right? Perfectionism is something I've dealt with a lot in my life, so we will return to it in a future episode. Another effect of the fear of failure is avoiding risk. It's a very common result of the fear of failure to only attempt things that we are good at. We will avoid challenging tasks that are new, that are a possibility of failure, or a possibility that we look foolish if we fail. Again, can you see how limiting this is? How this destroys creativity or even self-expression? Anger or resentment is another effect. When we fail, when others contribute to our failure, or when we are just insulted in some way, anger is a normal response. Now, feeling angry isn't wrong. Unfortunately, rather than using our anger constructively, many of us either burst out in anger or we suppress it what I like to call stewing without doing. If people hinder you from meeting your standards, you might become angry, enraged, or resentful. You might blame them, reject them, or withdraw from them. They kept you from reaching one of your deepest needs. Now, some of the coping methods that we use to avoid these things is just to simply avoid situations where failure is likely, or we work only in areas of our strengths, or we offer excuses, or we explain away failure, or we just try harder to perform. We may even lower our standards or blame others or just downright become lazy. Another effect is worry and self-condemnation. It is very hard to relax and embrace life when we are consumed by the fear of failure. We will worry about everything, even things we can control, which is so ridiculous because they are things we can control. We also are very critical of ourselves in failure. Instead of learning from our failures, we are critical of ourselves and possibly even abusive. Taking this to the extreme, this can lead to depression. Low motivation is another effect. Why be motivated about something we assume we will fail at anyway? This can lead to another very pesky problem, which is known as procrastination. Another very big topic, which we will cover in a future episode. So if we base our self-worth on our ability to meet certain standards, we will typically avoid the risk altogether, or we will be driven to succeed no matter the cost. Now, this last point is kind of interesting if you think about it. To think that a high drive to succeed might actually be a detrimental thing. It all depends on the motive. If you're driven to succeed based on passion, creativity, and adventure, that is one thing. But if you're driven to succeed because your worth is tied to it, that is quite another thing. Now, here's the irony of that whole mindset. Say your success is tied to your worth, and you do succeed in major ways. You would think the fear of failure would now disappear, right? But it doesn't. I've seen countless people who suddenly had a new fear, the fear of losing what they have attained, the fear of failing and losing that success. Ironically, success does not reduce the amount of fear we experience in our lives. Let me say that again. Success does not reduce the amount of fear that we experience in our lives. In fact, success often causes our fears to escalate because we realize now that we have more to lose. So when we evaluate ourselves by our performance, we're ultimately going to lose no matter how successful we are in that moment. If we believe that our self-worth is based on our success, we will try to avoid failure at all times. Most of us have become experts at avoiding failure. We attempt only those things that we're confident of success. We will avoid activities in which the risk of failure is just too great. We spend time around those who are not a threat to us. We avoid people who, either because of their great success or by their possible disapproval of us, make us feel like failures. And we train ourselves very well. On the other hand, we may feel very good about ourselves because we are winning the performance game. We may be so talented that we are reaching virtually every goal that we set for ourselves. And to me, this is probably the most dangerous of all situations because we don't understand what's going on behind the scenes, what our motivations are. And we also can't afford to make mistakes because this, again, will completely destroy any self-worth that we have. The ultimate goal is not to conquer all your goals. The ultimate goal is to pursue your passions, your first things. And the secondary goal is to embrace failure as a teacher and keep moving toward your first things no matter what. So how can you do this? So let's go ahead and switch over into some action steps as we always do in every episode. I don't think I have to convince you very much of what this whole phenomena is of a performance trap and a fear of failure. I think it affects all of us. So let's now move into 7 action steps that can help you start getting past this performance trap in your life. Number 1, realize that failure happens. Now, can we just move on? Let's be real here. No matter how much you learn and move forward from a failure in life, the fact of the matter is that failures do happen, even to the best of us. But you know what? Who cares? I've personally found that as soon as you accept failure as a reality, it isn't this big, frightening thing that you once thought it was. You'd be surprised at how much freedom that gives you to move forward, try new things, and experience success that you might not have otherwise. This can also be helpful for someone who deals with perfectionism. Often we struggle with that because we are trying to live a delusional fantasy that we can prevent failure from ever happening. And I guess once we solve that, then we can tackle growing old and death at the same time. I mean, there are just some things in life that happen, and failure is one of them. Our focus is not to prevent failure, but our focus is on how we respond to failure when it happens. Number 2, remember past failures. And really, think about the last failure you had in life. Did your world come crashing down around you like you prophesied that it would? Even if it did, and quite honestly, it has for me a few times, chances are that you've moved on, you've gotten past it, and you've become stronger and wiser because of it. So the next time you find yourself not taking a certain chance or being crippled by the fear of failure, remember that you've overcome failure before, and guess what? You will again. And as a result of this exercise, realize that you are not your failures. Failures are simply events in life. They aren't you. They aren't your identity. Don't own them. Learn from them and move on. Have you ever seen a cat or a dog chase its tail? I have a dog, a small Havanese dog named Tucker, and he will occasionally get really ticked off at his tail and start chasing it. It is one of the funniest things to watch him spin around and around in fury. Now listen to this clip by Wayne Dyer on something very similar to this.
There's a little kitten and there's an alley cat. And they're out in the alley, and the little kitten is chasing his tail. You've all seen little kittens do that. And he's chasing and chasing and chasing. And this old alley cat comes up to him and says, what are you doing? He said, well, I've just returned from cat philosophy school. All right? And I learned 2 things in cat philosophy school. 1, that the most important thing in the world for a cat is happiness. And 2, that it's located in my tail. And what I'm doing is I'm chasing and chasing. As soon as I get a hold of my tail, I will have a lock on eternal happiness. And the old alley cat looks at him and said, I didn't have the same benefits you did. I've kind of been out in the alley scratching for my food for 13 years. He said, but it's funny, I've learned the same thing you did in school. I learned that happiness is the most important thing in the world for a cat, and indeed that it's located in my tail. But he said, the only difference between you and I is, he said, I've found that if I go about my business and live my life the way I want to, it follows after me wherever I go. And that's really a real important message for young people to me. And I wish the people who teach adolescent psychology and pre-adolescent psychology and toddler psychology, and infant psychology would help people to understand that as long as you approve of you and are operating on your own inner principles, you're going to continuously run into a lot of flack and a lot of outrageous remarks from other people, and people who love you the very, very most in your life are going to disapprove of a lot of things that you do. But that's always their opinion, and don't elevate theirs above your own. Eleanor Roosevelt had a great line. She said that no one can make a fool of you without your consent.
While Wayne mentioned the tail as happiness, I think anything in life might work in this illustration, including failure. And what many of us do is to so focus on failure that we end up like my dog, forever chasing it and going in endless circles. Instead, just keep moving forward in life. And sure, failures will follow you, but they will always be behind you if you just keep moving forward. Now, one thing you can try, and I've done this several times myself, is this. List a situation in which your performance did not measure up to the standards that you had set for yourself. Identify certain things like what your standards you felt you needed to meet. Then try to remember what your thoughts were, what the emotions that went along with that in that particular occasion, and what actions you took in terms of your thinking and your feelings. So let's say you have a situation, I failed a test. So what's the standard? Why am I upset about this? Well, the standard is I must make at least a B in this class to feel good about myself. That is the standard I've set up. Now, what are my thoughts? My thoughts start going in line with that failure, saying I'll never make it through this class. My friends will think I'm stupid. My parents will be so ashamed of me. Now, what are our emotions going to be? Our emotions are going to be anger and depression. And what are my actions because of all that? Well, I end up avoiding my professor, and I yell at my roommate for making so much noise that I couldn't actually study for this test, and then I withdraw from my friends. So going through an exercise like this can really help you to overcome issues of performance or fear of failure. You need to go back to your thoughts and fix those. And fixing those might require you to also adjust your standard. Also, ask yourself some tough questions. Do you see any patterns reflected in your emotions and actions? If so, what are they? Why do people use performance as a measurement of personal worth? Do you have to be successful in order to feel good about yourself? What would you have to be or do to feel like you are a success? And what area would you never allow yourself to fail? How does your desire to meet your performance standard affect your relationship with others? How do you feel toward those who hinder your ability to meet your standard? What things do you do in order to avoid failure? How do you think your life would be different if you did not experience the fear of failure? All really great questions that I would suggest you take some time and answer and think through these. Number 3, study other people. Something that has always encouraged me when it comes to taking risk, getting over the performance trap, getting over the fear of failure, is to listen and to read stories of people who have achieved great things, but also experienced great failures, who have gone through very similar situations. Some of the biggest innovators and the most successful people will admit to have gone through multiple failures before arriving where they are now. Let me give you 2 famous examples of failures. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States, serving from March 1861 until his assassination in April of 1865. He had a long, long history of failures before ever becoming the president of the United States. In 1832, he lost his job and he decided to enter into politics. In 1832, he was defeated for the legislature. In 1838, he was defeated for speaker. In 1842, he was defeated to be nominated for Congress. In 1848, he lost the nomination as a congressman. In 1849, he was rejected for the commissioner of the General Land Office. In 1854, he was defeated for the Senate. And in 1856, he was defeated for the nomination for vice president. Yet in spite of so many failures, Abraham Lincoln had a series of accomplishments that he is known for today. He's not known for his failures today, although he had a lot of failures. He led the country to victory during the Civil War. He contributed profoundly toward the ending of widespread slavery in America, and he's been ranked among the greatest president that America has ever had. Yet he experienced tremendous failure in his life, but he never quit moving forward. Another story comes from Steve Jobs, somebody I've mentioned several times on this podcast. in past episodes. The co-founder, chairman, chief executive officer of Apple, unending failures, but he never let that stop him. Let's talk about some of his failures. The Apple III computer, the first PC with a very poor design. There was a computer called the Lisa, which was very expensive for general use. The company suffered tremendous losses. The early Macintosh computers were bulky and slow. He was fired from the company he helped create, fired from Apple at one time. And when he returned to Apple, he did have some successes, some major successes like the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, but he still had some products that didn't do so well, like the Apple TV, or there was a next like Apple G4 Cube that didn't do very well at all. He had tremendous failures in his life, and I can't even imagine what it must be like to be fired from a company that you founded. That's just incredible. And how do you bounce back from something like that? Yet I've played his speech, his commencement speech from Stanford University, where he basically says this: I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. Sometimes life hits you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. So I'm convinced you should read biographies. You should listen to audiobooks of biographies. Hear about the failures of others. The problem that I've had in the past is that I can easily start thinking that I am the only one who fails. I'm the only one who struggles with such things. That everyone else has their act together and doesn't struggle with such matters. And the fact is, I'm not the only one. Listen to this clip of Michael Jordan, the famous basketball player, talk about how some people look at his success the wrong way, as if he never had any setbacks, as if he never had to struggle and move toward his potential.
Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I led you to believe it was easy when it wasn't. Maybe I made you think my highlights started at the free throw line and not in the gym. Maybe I made you think that every shot I took was a game winner. That my game was built on flash and not fire. Maybe it's my fault that you didn't see that failure gave me strength, that my pain was my motivation. Maybe I led you to believe that basketball was a God-given gift and not something I worked for every single day of my life. Maybe I destroyed the game. Or maybe you're just making excuses.
Even the people I would think are the greatest and most successful have setbacks. They struggle with failure, and they struggle with the temptation to tie their worth to success and performance. And if you will study other people, your fear of failure will slowly start dissolving as you realize you aren't alone. Let me encourage you. You are not alone. You are not alone. Number 4, redefine failure. Now, this could stimulate a huge breakthrough for you. It's easy to find successful people who have experienced failure, as I've already mentioned. But here's some other examples. We've already mentioned Michael Jordan, widely considered one of the greatest basketball players of all times. And yet he was cut from his high school basketball team because his coach didn't think he had enough skills. How about Warren Buffett, one of the world's richest and most successful businessmen, was rejected by Harvard University? I have dealt with students who started a doctorate and never finished it. And guess what? I have been in 3 doctoral programs and only finished my last one. I started one, didn't finish. Started another one, didn't finish. Now, is this a total failure or is it a partial success? I would not go back and change any of those experiences. And I didn't give up in spite of failure and eventually accomplished my goal. A failure on one level is often a success on another when we're less black or white about it. The Scottish pharmacologist Sir Alexander Fleming succeeded in accidentally discovering penicillin, which, by the way, has saved hundreds of millions of lives because he failed to clear away cultures on a bench in the corner of his laboratory. Think about that. His failure has saved lives. Aren't you thankful for his failure? We must loosen up our thinking about what constitutes success and failure. Few things are that absolute. A relationship, for example, can work, but still have ups and downs, still have little failings. Listen to how some of these famous people define failure. William D. Brown said, "Failure is an event, never a person." Thomas Edison, "I failed my way to success." F. Scott Fitzgerald, "Never confuse a single defeat with a final defeat." And this one's unknown. I'm not sure who said this. Remember that failure is not the opposite of success. It is a part of success. Napoleon Hill says this, "Every adversity, every failure, and every heartache carries with it the seed of an equivalent or a greater benefit." Tony Robbins said, "No matter how prepared you are, there's one thing that I can guarantee. If you are on the river of life, it's likely you're going to hit a few rocks." That's not being negative, that's being accurate. The key is that when you do run aground, instead of beating yourself up for being such a failure, remember there are no failures in life. There are only results. If you don't get the results you wanted, learn from this experience so that you have references about how to make better decisions in the future. He also said this, "As long as a person breathes and is willing to act, there is nothing final about failure." Listen to this other quote that Michael Jordan gives about his own example.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
He also stated rightly, "I can accept failure. Everyone fails at something, but I can't accept not trying." J.K. Rowling of Harry Potter fame says this, love this quote, "It is impossible to live without failing at something unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default." Robert Allen says, "There is no failure, only feedback." So who taught you that failure was a bad thing? You say, "Well, it feels bad, so it must be bad." Really? I mean, so exercise may feel bad. So does that make it bad for you? I would encourage you to begin seeing failure differently, defining it differently. Have you ever had a teacher that you initially didn't like because maybe they were really demanding or had some quirky personality that ended up being one of your all-time favorite teachers? Look at each failure as that type of teacher. Okay, so they initially annoy you. Fine. But if you're willing, this failure can be one of the most amazing teachers you will ever have in your life if you will let it. It's not through success that we become wise, but it's through our failures. I know you may feel like being afraid of failure is horrible, and that is because you imagine it to be so in your mind. Look at the pictures and thoughts that come up when you think about the fear of failure. What do you see? Do you see yourself failing in front of a large group of people, which then proceed to laugh and point at you? They are nothing but thoughts. You can get through them if you want to. Once upon a time when you were a toddler, you didn't fear failure because the word failure was not something you knew about. It wasn't part of your vocabulary. Part of the trick in overcoming paralyzing fear of failure is to return to some of that innocence that you had and forget about, quote, failure and, quote, success. Just enjoy the process of seeing how far you can take something. Again, remember what Robert Allen said, no failure, only feedback. And yes, I know that one's kind of a cliche, but it's true. We learn what works by what doesn't work. If we don't try, we don't learn. Keep an open mind. Think in terms of feedback and results. A good scientific researcher will see results from a study not as success or failure, but just as results that need to be considered objectively. There's something that used to really frustrate me in academic writing called significance bias. That is, some academic journals had a tendency to only publish articles that showed that things did work or got better. But to me, sometimes the greatest discoveries are when things don't work. If something doesn't work, then great. Have a party and celebrate. Now you know to do things differently. There's an old saying, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. Successful people need to do the same. Ask yourself, what happened here? How can that be improved? What bits work better than others? So forget the word failure, or at least your old definitions of it. Remember, truly confident people aren't the ones who know for sure they'll succeed. They're the ones who know they'll handle failure if it happens. Fear of failure so often means fear of failing other people's expectations, which deep down might not be your idea of success. You need to ask yourself, what does success mean to me? And we will deal with the fear of rejection in a future episode as well. If you've ever had kids, you know what I'm about to talk about. Observe the first step that a baby takes in its quest to walk, or the first step that a baby bird takes in its quest to fly. In both of those scenarios, we see how a baby keeps faltering and failing, but continues its endeavor to stand and walk. Not even once does the baby frown and feels, oh, you know what, people, I failed. I don't even know what I was thinking. What a failure I am. I give up and I refuse to try anymore. That isn't what happens. That baby has the sweetest chuckle and laughter in its demeanor. The mother of that infant continues coaxing and encouraging and clapping and nudging them on until that baby does take the first step. In that mother, we see the very presence of a coach who views this not as a success or a failure, but as a process in life. Jane Powell has rightly said, dissipate fear of failure by rediscovering the child within. We could all do well to regain that child we were, the person who is not worried about failure or being labeled as negative. So I realize this is a long action point, but I think it's very important. This is a very, very important step. How do we redefine failure? So here's my new definition. Failure is simply an event in which the outcome was not what I had hoped. This event now becomes a stepping stone toward my success, as I now have evidence of what didn't work, which will ultimately now push me in the direction of what will work. Before, failing was something I feared like it was the end. It was death. It was poison. Now I can push to not fearing it because I understand failure is often the catalyst to success, not the inhibitor of it. Let me say that again. Understand that failure is often the catalyst to success, not the inhibitor of it. And I think that is a huge key. How would you live life differently knowing that failure is not an inhibitor, but a catalyst? I'm not suggesting that you will feel the pain and failure any less, but just knowing that it isn't the end, knowing that it is almost medical in nature, can be a great help toward freedom. Number 5, failure is temporary. Failure feels permanent, but it isn't. You and I both know that, but we don't act like it is so. I never assume that I know it all, nor do I assume that I am above failure. Even the most successful people fail every single day. The difference between the successful and the not yet successful is the realization that failure is simply a stepping stone, not a permanent event. Remember, it isn't what happens to you that counts. It is how you respond. And even if you have failed, it is only temporary unless you choose to give up and not get back up and keep moving toward your potential and passion. Number 6, deal with stinking thinking. Often we have this movie playing in our thoughts and imagination, and in this movie we fail and our entire world falls apart. Or you may imagine yourself failing, and in the movie in your head, it just stops there. The end. And the credits begin to roll on the screen. The hero has died. All is lost. If you let that movie keep playing, though, you will realize that failure may be exactly what you needed. Whether they're aware of it or not, all people keep a running account of what's happening to them, what it means, and what they should do. In other words, our minds are constantly monitoring and interpreting. That's just how we stay on track. But sometimes the interpretation process goes screwy on us. Some people put more extreme interpretations on things that happen and then react with exaggerated feelings of anxiety, depression, or anger, or even superiority. Most people never stop to observe their thoughts, and they never stop to ponder their thoughts could be wrong. I failed more times than I can count, and yes, there are still times I fear failure. The difference now versus before is that I know the fear of failure is just a thought. It is just another example of what I call stinking thinking. And in my episode on feeling stuck, I talked about how thoughts trigger emotions. So this thought conjures up feelings in my body that feels bad, but it has no bearing in reality. It is often exaggerated and out of control. Why give your thoughts all that authority if they make you feel bad? It may be the messenger, the teacher, the lesson you needed to succeed down the road. Failure isn't easy, but it is what will make you the person you want to become. Mindsets frame the running account that's taking place inside of people's heads. They guide the whole interpretation process. A fixed mindset creates this internal dialogue or monologue maybe that is focused on judging. This means I'm a loser. This means I'm a better person than they are. This means that I'm a bad husband. This means that my partner is selfish. So how might such thoughts sound like for someone caught in a performance trap or dominated by the fear of failure? Well, they may sound like this. People will think I'm weak and couldn't hack it. I'll be exposed as someone who talks a good game but can't deliver. People will be disappointed in me. No one will ever believe in me again, and I sure won't believe in myself again. I'll die from embarrassment. If I can't do this, it means I'll never be able to do anything. It'll mean that I'm not as smart, talented, or skilled as I think I am. The obvious problem here is that all those responses use very serious and highly charged words like never, always, only, or die. I'll die of embarrassment. And when we assess the actual facts, we find these words tend to be overstatements that fall into categories of how we interpret things, assumptions, emotionally charged extrapolations, irrational beliefs, whatever you want to call them. The thing they are typically or not are proven facts. Now, all of this is not to say that fear is unhealthy. Certainly, a fear of bears or snakes can keep us alive, but there are times in this modern world where our fear reactions get pointed to something quite abstract, perhaps even imagined. And if you fail in your goal to escape a crazed bear outside your tent, you will most likely be dead a few minutes later. But if you fail in your goal to increase your savings this month, you've got at least a decent chance to still be alive 30 minutes later. The fact is, most of the repercussions we face if we fail in achieving our goals are not going to kill us. And not only will we not actually die of embarrassment, we might not even experience any embarrassment at all. However, we are human beings and we're not computers, so we can't just flip a switch and say, feeling like I'll die of embarrassment is irrational, so I'll just stop feeling that way. That just doesn't happen. We've got to debunk these thoughts in our heads, just like we were an attorney cross-examining a witness. So we're going to take each of these fear statements and one by one ask ourselves if we can find any examples that might provide evidence to the contrary of what we said. Let's take the example, if I fail to achieve my goal, I'll die from embarrassment. Can you find any examples in your life or even someone else's life where you failed to achieve a goal but didn't die? And to take it a step further, can you find any examples where any embarrassment you felt was far less than what you were expecting? Now, by virtue of your being alive and listening to me right now, I'm guessing you found at least one example that refutes the belief that I'll die of embarrassment. Once you finish that exercise, it's time to rewrite those fear statements. You've debunked them now, so turn them around into something a lot more encouraging. For example, if I fail at this goal, people won't think I'm weak. In fact, they may even rally to my defense. Or, if I fail at this goal, people will still believe in me. If I can't do this specific goal, it has no bearing on my ability to tackle other difficult goals. Again, I go into greater detail in my Stuck episode, which is episode number 8. But the way you get your emotions in check is to start fixing how you think about things. Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck calls this a shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, and she lists the following examples. As you approach a challenge, the fixed mindset says, are you sure you can do it? Maybe you don't have the talent. But a growth mindset answers, I'm not sure I can do it now, but I think I can learn with time and effort. The fixed mindset says, what if you fail? You'll be a failure. Growth mindset answers back, most successful people had failures along the way. You're arguing with yourself. You're saying, no, this isn't how I'm going to think. This is how I'm going to think. A fixed mindset says, if you don't try, you can protect yourself and keep your dignity. But the growth mindset steps in and says, if I don't try, I automatically fail. Where's the dignity in that? If you hit a setback, the fixed mindset says, this would have been a snap if you really had talent. The growth mindset steps in and says, oh, that's so wrong. Basketball wasn't easy for Michael Jordan. Science wasn't easy for Thomas Edison, yet they had passion and put in tons of effort. If you face criticism, the fixed mindset says, it's not my fault. It was something, it was someone else that did this to me. Whereas a growth mindset says, well, if I don't take responsibility, I can't fix it. So let me listen, however painful it is, and learn whatever I can. And lastly, number 7, treat your life as an adventure, as an experiment. As Emerson said, life is a series of experiments. The more you make, the better. Each failure is a trial in an experiment and an opportunity for growth. Even if a failure costs you financially, the educational benefit can far outweigh the loss. What if you knew that you would succeed at something after 5 failures? Would you do it? What if it was after 20 failures? Or if you knew that after 100 failures, you would finally succeed? Think about that. We often give up something because we feel we'll never succeed. But what if? What if just 2 more tries and you would have succeeded? Would you have stuck with it? If you really want something, don't give up. Don't take failures to mean you will never get there. All they mean is you haven't gotten there yet. And if you have to, make a contingency plan. Sometimes a way to overcome the fear of failure is to reduce the downside. Hedge your risk by creating a contingency plan if you must. Even if your first option fails, you can maintain the status quo with a solid backup plan. Daring to fail doesn't mean you have to risk losing it all. If you manage risk intelligently, you can capture the benefits of a high-risk opportunity while leaving yourself a safety net. But no matter what, keep playing and play your game. Well, that wraps up this episode on escaping from the performance trap and working to overcome the fear of failure. This is a big topic. Matters like perfectionism and procrastination deserve their own episodes, and this will happen soon, I promise you. Just a sneak peek, some of the upcoming topics that I'm planning: perfectionism, the science of attention and distraction, seeing your life as a journey, and the more detailed look into happiness I mentioned several weeks ago. I will also circle back around and talk about procrastination as well. Now, I had planned on talking through some actual listener feedback that I've gotten recently. I wanted to do that as part of my 10th episode. I was so excited about some of the feedback I've been getting from people and some of the questions I wanted to actually answer on that show. But it went a little bit long today, so I will talk about that in the next episode as well. As always, please consider leaving me a rating and comment on iTunes. This just helps me get the word out to people. It helps people read about me. It helps for them to read what you're saying about me. It's just a very great thing, and I deeply appreciate every one of you who takes the time to leave a rating and leave a comment. Thank you so much. Again, if you have any comments on this episode, I do have a discussion area set up at firstthingsproductivity.com/10 as in episode 10. So until next time, remember this. An infinity of forest lies dormant within the dream of one acorn. You may feel like a puny little acorn, but within you is the capacity for great, amazing adventures. But don't sell yourself short, even in failures. You aren't a failure if you tried and got back up. Remember that failure is a catalyst, not an inhibitor toward success. Embrace today with passion and intention, and don't die with your music still inside you.